The billionaire sat in the corner of a quiet cafe, sipping his expensive coffee. His mind filled with numbers, business deals, and the constant chase for more money. He had everything a man could ask for: cars, mansions, private jets. But inside, he felt a kind of emptiness that no luxury could ever fill. People around him often smiled at him, but he knew most of them were after his wealth. That was why he trusted no one. As he scrolled through his phone, something caught his eye near the counter. A young girl, no more than 16 or 17, was standing there holding a small pack of bread and a juice box. She was different from the other customers. Her clothes were old but clean, her face looked innocent, yet it carried the weight of someone who had already faced too many hardships. She tried to speak to the cashier, but no words came out. Only her hands moved. Forming signs, the billionaire narrowed his eyes. He realized quickly that the girl was deaf. The cashier looked confused, struggling to understand what she wanted. The girl pointed at her pocket, trying to pull out some coins, but it was clear she didn't have enough. Her cheeks turned red, her eyes filled with embarrassment. People in the line behind her grew impatient. Some sighed loudly, some even whispered unkind words. The billionaire kept watching, his interest growing. He had seen many people in his life beg for money, ask for help, or try to trick him with sad stories. He believed humans were selfish by nature, but this girl, she didn't ask for pity. She didn't beg anyone to pay for her. She just stood there fumbling with her small coins, desperate to pay for her bread. The billionaire's curiosity grew stronger, slowly. He stood up from his table and walked to the counter. Everyone's eyes followed him. His expensive suit and confident steps made it clear he wasn't an ordinary man. The girl looked up at him, confused and nervous. Her hands froze midair. She wasn't sure what he wanted. The billionaire gave a small smile, one that hid a secret challenge. He pulled out his sleek black credit card, the one that had no limit, and handed it to her. The girl blinked, not understanding at first. She looked from the card to his face, trying to figure out why a stranger would give her something so valuable. Her fingers trembled as she held it. The cafe went silent. The cashier raised his eyebrows in shock. The billionaire leaned slightly closer and said in a calm but testing voice, "Go ahead, use it." The girl's lips parted, but no sound came. She shook her head slightly, as if to say she didn't deserve it. But the billionaire only nodded, urging her to take it. For him, this wasn't kindness, this was a test. He wanted to see what she would do with such power. In his world, people always chose greed. If he gave this card to any of his so-called friends, they would run to buy jewelry, designer clothes, or the latest gadgets. He was certain this girl would do the same. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. It wasn't excitement or greed. It was fear mixed with confusion. She held the card like it was a piece of glass that could break any second. She gave him a small nod, a silent thank you, and walked toward the door, clutching the card to her chest. The billionaire returned to his table, pretending to check his phone, but inside he was curious. He had given his card to strangers before, and each time they disappointed him. They proved his belief that people cared only about themselves. He expected the same from this deaf girl. He expected her to run into the nearest store and fill her arms with luxuries she could never afford. He was ready to confirm once again that kindness was wasted on people. But as he watched her leave the cafe, something inside him whispered that this time might be different. The way she held the card, not with hunger but with hesitation, made him wonder for the first time in years. The billionaire felt a spark of curiosity that was not about business or money. It was about a human being. He stood up, tossed a few bills on the table for his coffee, and followed her quietly. Keeping enough distance so she wouldn't notice, he told himself it was just a game, just another test of human nature, yet deep down, he knew he wanted to be proven wrong. He wanted, perhaps, to believe that goodness still existed in this world, and so, with silent footsteps and a heart he didn't fully understand, the billionaire trailed the deaf girl into the unknown, waiting to see what choices she would make with the power of his limitless card. The girl stepped out of the cafe with the black card still in her hand. Her fingers gripped it tightly as if she was holding a treasure she didn't deserve. The world outside seemed louder, busier, but for her it was always silent. She looked down at the card again, shiny, heavy, and unreal. She had never owned anything so powerful in her life. For a moment her steps slowed, her heart raced as she thought, why did that stranger give this to me? Behind her, the billionaire followed at a distance. His polished shoes made no sound on the pavement. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl. He was waiting, watching. ready to see the moment when greed would show itself in his mind. The story was already written. She would walk into a store. Her eyes would light up at the sight of glittering things, and she would waste the chance on selfish desires. He leaned against a street lamp pretending to check his phone, but his gaze never left her. The girl, meanwhile, hesitated at a street corner. She turned the card in her hand again and again. She could feel the weight of trust that had been placed on her. Her lips pressed together, her eyes uncertain. She wasn't used to kindness. Most of the time people avoided her or spoke about her in low voices. Some even mocked her for being deaf. But this man had handed her something beyond her imagination. She couldn't hear his voice, but his face carried a challenge she didn't fully understand. Slowly, she took a breath and started walking again. Her feet carried her not to the bright clothing stores or fancy restaurants nearby, but toward the quieter side of the street. Her shoulders were tense, as if she was preparing herself for something heavy. The billionaire frowned slightly, surprised. Not the luxury shops, he thought, his curiosity deepened. At one point, the girl paused by a window display. It was a jewelry store, filled with sparkling necklaces and gold watches. The lights inside made everything glow for a brief second. She pressed her hand against the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but young. Her eyes lingered on a necklace that shone like the stars. The billionaire smirked to himself. Ah, here it comes, he thought. He was sure she would step inside, but instead she pulled her hand back, shook her head softly, and walked away. Leaving the glow behind her, the billionaire tilted his head, his interest now burning brighter. He was not expecting restraint. Every person he had tested before always went straight to greed, but this girl, she looked at the shiny things and chose to walk away. It made him feel uneasy, like a wall inside his heart had a tiny crack. The girl clutched the card tighter. Her mind was filled with memories of her younger brother waiting at home, his small face pale from sickness, his chest rising and falling with weak breaths. She thought about how he often went hungry so she could eat. She thought about the times she cut her own meals in half so he would have enough. Luxury never crossed her mind, responsibility did. As she turned onto another street, she spotted a pharmacy sign glowing in the distance. Her steps quickened, her eyes softened. She walked straight inside, the billionaire still following. Almost laughed. A pharmacy? That was the last place he expected her to go. He leaned near the entrance, pretending to browse a newspaper stand, but his eyes stayed locked on her every move. Inside, the girl moved slowly along the aisles. She picked up a small box of medicine, then some bandages and a bottle of vitamins. She carefully read the labels, making sure she chose the right ones. Her hands trembled not with excitement but with care. She was thinking not about herself but about someone else. The cashier scanned the items, and when she pulled out the black card, her hands shook as though she was afraid of breaking it. She signed thank you softly to the cashier after the purchase, though she knew he might not understand. It was her habit to always be polite, even if the world didn't notice. The billionaire's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't used to this sight. He had seen beggars spend their last coins on cheap thrills. He had seen business partners lie for profit. He had seen friends betray him for luxury, but this girl, she used his limitless card to buy medicine and food. Simple things that showed where her heart truly was. When she left the store, her bag carried no luxury items, only the weight of care and sacrifice. She walked quickly now, as if someone was waiting for her. The billionaire followed once more, but this time his smirk was gone. His eyes were softer, his chest felt heavy. Something inside him whispered that this girl might not only pass his test, but also change something deep within him. She didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know a billionaire was silently questioning his own beliefs because of her. All she knew was that her brother needed her, and she had been given a chance, just one chance, to make his life a little easier. And so while the city buzzed with lights, cars, and endless noise she could never hear, the deaf girl carried her bag of essentials and the black card, unaware that every step she took was pulling the billionaire deeper into a story he never expected to live. The evening air was cool as the girl walked down the street with the small bag in her hand. Inside it were only a few things: medicine, bandages, some simple food items, and vitamins, nothing fancy, nothing expensive. She held the bag close to her chest, as though it contained the most precious treasures in the world. The black card was tucked safely inside her pocket. She still could not understand why a stranger had given it to her, but she knew she had to use it carefully. A few steps behind her, the billionaire followed with silent curiosity. His eyes stayed locked on her every move. He had expected her to run wild, to rush into stores filled with glittering shoes, handbags, and clothes. Instead, he had seen her walk calmly through the pharmacy. Choosing only what was needed, he was puzzled. His mind, trained by years of business deals and betrayals, could not accept it so easily. Why would she waste the chance of a lifetime on something so small? He thought the girl's steps were not random. She moved with purpose, her eyes stayed focused ahead. She passed by a bakery where the smell of fresh cakes filled the air. For a brief second, she turned her head, watching children press their faces to the glass, giggling as their parents bought them sweets. Her lips curled into a faint smile, but she did not go inside. She walked past. Her money, or rather the money she had been given, was not for her happiness. It was for something far greater. The billionaire leaned against a wall for a moment, his expensive watch catching the streetlight. He thought back to all the times he had given money to people as a test. Some cried with gratitude but later used it on selfish desires. Some promised to pay him back but disappeared forever. He had built his belief on those experiences. People were greedy, selfish, and weak, but this girl was different, and it was bothering him more than he cared to admit. She turned into a quieter street. Away from the noise of the city, the buildings grew older, their paint peeling, their windows cracked. This was not the kind of neighborhood the billionaire ever entered. It was far from the glittering towers he lived in, yet he followed. His polished shoes now looked out of place on the cracked sidewalks. The girl stopped at a small second-hand shop. Its window displayed old clothes and worn-out shoes. Inside, she looked through the racks carefully. Her hands touched the fabric as though measuring their strength. She picked a small sweater, checked the size, and then nodded to herself. She carried it to the counter and once again pulled out the black card. The cashier gave her a strange look, surprised that such a card was being used there. But the girl simply gave a polite nod and signed her thanks. When she stepped outside again, she hugged the sweater close. She knew it wasn't new. It wasn't shiny, but it was warm. And her brother needed warmth more than anything else. Her mind kept returning to him, his weak body, his pale skin, the way he coughed at night when the cold air crept through their broken windows. She was not shopping for herself. She was shopping for him. The billionaire rubbed his chin. His heart felt heavier with each choice she made. He was starting to realize that she was not the kind of person his world was full of. She was not looking for pleasure. She was looking for survival, and she wasn't thinking of herself at all. Every item she bought told him that her heart belonged to someone else, someone she cared for more than her own needs. As the sky darkened, she walked faster. Her shoes tapped against the uneven road. Her small figure seemed even smaller in the shadow of tall, broken buildings. The billionaire followed at a steady pace. His eyes softened as he thought of how lonely her world must be, silent and full of struggles, and yet she carried herself with quiet strength. At one point, a group of boys laughed loudly on the corner, throwing stones at an old can. The girl passed by quietly, her head lowered. She could not hear their laughter, but she could feel their eyes. One of them pointed at her worn shoes and smirked. The billionaire clenched his fists, ready to step forward, but the girl kept walking, ignoring the mockery. Her courage and silence struck him deeply. She did not fight back, she simply chose to move forward, holding her bag and the sweater like shields of hope. Finally, she reached a narrow alley. The billionaire hesitated for a moment. It was not a place he ever imagined himself walking into, but he couldn't stop now. He had to see where this path ended. The girl slipped through a rusty gate and entered a small, crumbling building. Its walls were cracked, and its roof looked fragile. She climbed the stairs slowly, her body tired but her spirit determined. The billionaire stayed outside for a moment, staring at the building. His chest felt tight. He had tested her, but now he felt like he was being tested himself. This was no longer a game of curiosity. This was a mirror showing him the kind of life he had never known, a life full of sacrifice. He leaned against the gate, breathing heavily. The sound of children playing in the distance echoed in his ears. But his focus was on that one girl, climbing those stairs with a bag of medicine and a sweater. He whispered to himself almost in disbelief. She chose medicine instead of gold, food instead of jewelry, warmth instead of vanity. He had never seen anyone make such choices with his card before. His chest ached, his throat felt dry. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something breaking through the walls around his heart. And as the girl disappeared into the shadows of her building, he knew he had to keep following. He had to know why she was making these choices. and who she was protecting with such love and strength. What he would discover next would change him forever. The building was old and broken, its walls cracked and its windows covered with plastic instead of glass. The billionaire stood outside for a moment, staring at it. He could not believe that anyone could live in such a place. For a man who had spent his life surrounded by marble floors, golden chandeliers, and soft carpets, this sight was almost painful. Yet the girl walked inside without hesitation. As if this broken place was her safe world, he slowly followed, keeping a distance. The stairway smelled of dampness and dust. The lights above flickered weakly. His shiny shoes crunched against the dirt on the floor. He thought about turning back, but something inside him refused to let go. He needed to know where this girl lived. He needed to see the truth of her life. The girl climbed the stairs quietly. Her body was tired, but her steps were steady. She carried her bag carefully as though protecting something delicate. At the second floor, she stopped in front of a small wooden door. The paint was peeling and the lock looked weak. She pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. The billionaire waited until the door closed, then moved closer. He pressed his ear near the thin wood. At first there was only silence, then he heard faint movements. He took a deep breath and carefully peeked through a small crack in the door frame. Inside, the room was tiny. The ceiling leaked in one corner, and the floor was bare except for two thin mattresses. On one of them lay a young boy no older than 10. His face was pale, his lips dry. He coughed weakly, clutching his chest. The billionaire felt a strange tightness in his heart. He had expected the girl to live alone, but now he understood. Everything she had bought was for this boy. The girl placed the bag on the floor and hurried to her brother's side. Her eyes softened, her hands moved gently in sign language. Her brother's tired eyes lit up when he saw her. He smiled faintly, though he was too weak to sit up. She pulled the sweater from the bag and placed it around him, tucking him in like a mother would. The billionaire watched in silence, his throat felt dry. He had given the card expecting greed, but instead he was witnessing love. The girl had thought of nothing for herself. She had used every chance to make her brother's life a little better. She opened the medicine and carefully poured some onto a spoon. She helped her brother sit up slowly, holding his back with one hand. She placed the spoon near his lips, encouraging him to swallow. The boy obeyed, trusting her completely. Then she wiped his mouth with a cloth, her touch tender and patient. The billionaire felt something heavy inside him. He had seen many families break apart over money. He had seen brothers fight, parents abandon children, and friends betray each other. But here in this tiny broken room he saw the purest form of love. The girl had sacrificed everything for her brother. She had no jewelry, no phone, no new clothes, yet her eyes shone with purpose. After giving him medicine, she opened the food she had bought. She cut the bread into small pieces and placed them carefully on a plate. She poured juice into a small cup and handed it to him. The boy ate slowly, every bite filled with gratitude. She smiled, watching him eat, and only when he finished did she take a small piece for herself. The billionaire leaned against the wall outside, his chest rising and falling heavily. He was not used to this feeling. He felt guilty for testing her, guilty for living in comfort while she lived in struggle. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to hide the tears that threatened to fall, but no matter how much he fought it, the image of her gentle care burned inside his mind. The boy signed something with his small hands. The girl nodded, tears filling her eyes. She hugged him tightly, kissing his forehead. She promised him silently, through her actions, that she would always protect him. The billionaire could not hear their voices, but he could read the story in their eyes. Minutes passed. The girl cleaned the small room, folded the blanket, and sat beside her brother. She pulled out a small notebook and pencil. She began drawing pictures for him, little cartoons of animals and smiling faces. Her brother giggled softly, his shoulders shaking with joy. The billionaire felt his own lips tremble. He had not heard a genuine laugh in years, and even though this boy's laugh was soundless, it was more powerful than any music. He finally stepped back from the door, pressing his hand against his chest. He had come here thinking it was just another test, another experiment to prove his belief that people were selfish. But what he had seen was breaking his beliefs into pieces. This girl, this deaf girl, had shown him something no one in his world of wealth had ever shown: selflessness. For the first time in a long time, he felt tears sting his eyes. He tried to swallow them back, but they refused to go away. He whispered under his breath. How could she choose this when she had the chance to choose the world? He stood there in the dark hallway, his expensive watch ticking loudly. Yet for the first time he felt powerless. The richest man in the building was not him, it was the girl inside, who had nothing but love and still gave everything. The billionaire knew he couldn't just walk away. Something inside him told him that this story was not over. He would have to step inside her world, face her truth, and perhaps discover a part of himself that he had long buried. The billionaire stood frozen in the hallway, his heart heavy after what he had just seen. He leaned against the cracked wall, trying to control his breath. His life had been filled with meetings, contracts, and money, but never with moments like this. He had watched the girl care for her little brother with a love so deep it left him speechless. He had expected her to waste his card on selfish things, but instead, she had chosen medicine, food, and a sweater. He moved closer to the door again, peeking through the narrow crack inside. The small room glowed faintly under a single dim bulb. The girl was sitting on the floor beside her brother. She stroked his hair gently while he lay back against the thin pillow. Her hands moved slowly in sign language, and though the billionaire could not understand the words, he could feel the meaning. The boy's weak eyes brightened, and a small smile tugged at his lips. The girl took the sweater she had bought and tucked it carefully around him. She patted his chest softly, making sure he was warm. Then she opened the vitamins and placed one in his hand, encouraging him to take it. The boy nodded and swallowed it with a sip of juice. Her face lit up with relief. It was clear that every little step mattered to her. Every small effort was a victory in her world. The billionaire pressed his palm against his chest, feeling something stir inside him. For years he had told himself that love and kindness were illusions, that everyone had a price, yet here in this tiny room, he was watching proof that true care still existed. It shook him more than any business failure ever could. He continued watching as the girl unpacked the rest of the groceries. She placed the bread on a small plate, cutting it into neat pieces. Then she gave most of it to her brother, eating only a small piece herself. She chewed slowly, as if saving every bite for later. Her brother reached out with his thin hand and pushed a piece toward her, insisting she eat. Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head, smiling softly. She wanted him to eat more, not her. The billionaire's throat tightened. He had eaten at the world's most expensive restaurants, yet none of those meals had carried this much meaning. This bread, this simple act of sharing, held more value than gold. He felt ashamed of his own life where greed ruled every decision. After the meal, the girl pulled out a small notebook and pencil. She began to draw on the paper, quick sketches of animals and smiling faces. She showed them to her brother, who giggled silently. His shoulders shook with happiness. His eyes lit up as he clapped his hands softly, pointing at the drawings. The billionaire felt something wet on his face. He touched his cheek and realized it was a tear. He had not cried in years, not when deals collapsed, not when people betrayed him, not even when he lost family members who had only cared about his money. But now, watching a deaf girl and her sick brother laugh over simple drawings, his heart broke open. He let the tears fall silently. He did not care anymore if anyone saw inside. The girl hugged her brother tightly, pressing her forehead against his. Her hands moved quickly, signing words filled with emotion. Even though there was no sound, the room was full of warmth. The billionaire didn't need to understand the language to know what she was saying. She was promising him that she would always be there, that she would fight for him no matter how hard life became. The billionaire stepped back from the door, his body trembling. He walked a few steps down the hallway. Covering his face with his hands, he felt small, smaller than he had ever felt before. He had thought he was powerful because of his money. But here was a girl with nothing, and yet she was stronger than him. She had given him something no one else ever had, a glimpse of true humanity. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark city. The lights of tall buildings sparkled in the distance, those towers filled with people chasing wealth. But none of them could compare to the richness of what he had just seen in that tiny apartment. He whispered to himself, "She is richer than me, richer than all of us." His voice broke, his heart heavy with truth. After a while, he returned to the door. Peeking once more, the boy had fallen asleep, his chest rising and falling slowly. The girl tucked the blanket around him and kissed his forehead. Then she sat quietly by his side, her hand resting on his. She stared at him with eyes full of both fear and hope. Fear of losing him and hope that he would survive. The billionaire felt his chest ache again. He wanted to walk inside to tell her that she was not alone, to tell her that she had passed his test and shown him something priceless. But he held back. He wasn't ready, not yet. He needed to process what he had seen for years. He had believed money could buy anything, but now he knew it couldn't buy what he had just witnessed: sacrifice, love, and purity. He wiped his tears, but more came. He let them fall, standing in the darkness, his heart broken yet strangely alive. That night, the billionaire realized something he had forgotten long ago. He realized that humanity was not lost. It was here, in this small room, in the actions of a deaf girl who gave everything for her brother. And as he turned to leave, his steps were heavy, but his heart was changed forever. The billionaire stood in the hallway for a long time, his mind heavy with thoughts. He had watched everything: the girl's struggle, her sacrifices, her love for her brother, and her silent strength. His heart had been touched in a way he could not explain. He had wanted to stay hidden, just observing, but something inside him told him it was time to step forward. He could not simply walk away after what he had seen. He took a deep breath, straightened his suit, and knocked softly on the old wooden door. The sound echoed down the hallway. Inside the room, the girl looked up, her eyes filled with sudden fear. No one ever knocked on their door. She quickly stood, worried that it might be a landlord asking for rent, or perhaps some neighbor coming to complain. She glanced at her brother, who was still weak but awake, and signed to him that she would check. Slowly, she opened the door, and there he was, the same man from the cafe. The billionaire stood tall, his face serious, but his eyes softer than before. The girl froze, shocked to see him there. Her hand gripped the edge of the door tightly. She did not understand why he had followed her. Her heart pounded with confusion and fear. The billionaire cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. For a man used to giving speeches to powerful businessmen, it felt strange to be nervous in front of a teenage girl. "May I come in?" he asked gently. The girl tilted her head. Not fully hearing his voice, she tried to read his lips, but she was not perfect at it. She understood only part of what he said. Still, his body language was calm, not threatening. She hesitated, looking back at her brother. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The billionaire walked in slowly, his expensive shoes clicking softly on the worn floor. He looked around the small room, the cracked walls, the leaking ceiling, the thin mattresses. Every corner screamed of poverty, yet there was warmth, a feeling of love that no mansion had ever given him. The boy stared at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. He tugged at his sister's sleeve, asking silently who he was. The girl raised her hands and signed quickly, telling him it was the man who had given her the card. The boy's eyes widened even more, and he looked at the billionaire with a mix of fear and gratitude. The billionaire pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. He looked at the girl and said, "I was watching you." The girl frowned. Not understanding completely, he realized she could not hear, so he pointed to his eyes and then to her, trying to show her he had seen everything. Her cheeks turned red. She lowered her head, embarrassed. He sighed deeply and continued, "I gave you my card as a test." Again, he had to use his hands to point at the card, then at her, then at himself. She understood some of it, and her eyes widened. Her lips trembled. She signed quickly, her hands moving fast, though he could not understand. She was trying to explain, trying to tell him she had not meant to do wrong. The billionaire shook his head and raised a hand gently. He smiled softly to calm her down. No, you did nothing wrong." His voice cracked as he said it. His eyes filled with tears. He pointed at the medicine, the bread, the sweater, then at her brother, and finally at her heart. He wanted her to know he understood. He knew she had used everything for love, not greed. The girl's eyes watered. She shook her head, embarrassed that he had followed her and seen her life. She covered her face with her hands, afraid he might take the card back, afraid he might scold her, but instead, the billionaire leaned forward. His voice grew soft, almost breaking. "You showed me something today, something I had forgotten." She slowly lowered her hands. Her eyes red. She watched him carefully, still unsure what he meant. The billionaire pressed his hand against his chest, then pointed at her. His eyes glistened as tears finally rolled down his face. He was crying, not because of pain, not because of loss, but because of something he had not felt in years: humanity. The girl was shocked. She had never seen a man like him cry. She stepped back slightly, her brother clutching her hand tightly. But then she noticed his expression. It wasn't anger, it was gratitude. The billionaire leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice trembled. I thought people only cared about themselves. I thought no one in this world could be good without wanting something in return, but you proved me wrong. Even though she could not hear every word, she understood from his tone, from his tears, and from the way he kept pointing at her heart, her own eyes filled with tears. She wanted to tell him that she never thought of herself first, that her brother was her whole world, but she did not know how to make him fully understand, so instead, she placed her hand over her heart and then pointed to her brother. The billionaire nodded, wiping his tears. Yes, I see, he whispered. His shoulders shook as he let out a shaky breath. He was a man who had everything, but in that moment, he felt like he had nothing compared to her. The girl signed again, slowly this time, pointing to the card and then back to him, as if to ask if she should return it. He shook his head quickly, pushing it back toward her. His voice firm but kind. Keep it, you deserve it more than anyone I've ever met. Her eyes widened. She shook her head, not believing him. But he only smiled through his tears. His heart had already decided. This girl had changed him, and in that small room, with a sick boy lying on a thin mattress and a deaf girl standing with trembling hands, the billionaire felt more human than he had ever felt in his life. He had come to test her, but now he realized he had been the one tested, and she had passed in a way that shattered his soul. The billionaire sat in the small chair, his hands trembling as he tried to wipe away the tears on his face. He had not cried in years, not since he was a boy. His life had been built on power, money, and pride. Crying had no place in his world. Yet here he was in a tiny broken apartment, tears streaming down his cheeks because of a deaf girl and her sick little brother. The girl stood frozen, still holding her brother's hand. She watched the rich man with wide, confused eyes. She could not hear his words, but she could see his tears. That alone was enough to shock her. She had seen many people in life, cold neighbors, careless strangers, greedy shopkeepers, but she had never seen a man like him weep. She did not know whether to step closer or to keep her distance. The billionaire looked at her again, his eyes red, his voice cracked as he whispered, "You have no idea what you've done." Of course, she could not catch the words, but she could feel the weight in his tone. He pointed to his heart, then to her, then to her brother. His chest rose and fell heavily as more tears spilled. The boy tugged at his sister's sleeve and looked curiously at the stranger. The girl knelt beside him, signing slowly, trying to explain. She told him this was the man who had given her the card. The boy's eyes grew wide. He reached out his thin hand toward the billionaire. It was a simple gesture, but it made the billionaire's heart ache even more. He leaned forward, taking the boy's hand gently in his. His eyes burned with fresh tears. The boy smiled faintly, and the billionaire felt something inside him shatter. He had given that black card as a trick, a way to prove to himself once again that humans were greedy. He had been sure she would waste it, but instead she had bought medicine, food, and clothes for her brother. She had thought of nothing for herself, and now sitting in front of her, the billionaire realized the truth. He had been wrong about everything. The girl, still unsure of what he meant, moved her hands quickly, signing fast. She was nervous, explaining, apologizing, almost pleading with him not to be angry. Her hands shook as she pointed to the bag of groceries, then to her brother, then to herself. She was trying to tell him that she only wanted to care for her brother, not to take advantage of him. The billionaire shook his head. He leaned forward and held out his hand, stopping her from signing any further. His voice trembled as he said, "No, you don't understand. I'm not angry. I'm grateful." He pressed his palm to his chest again and let his tears fall freely. He wanted her to see that she had touched something inside him, something he thought had died long ago. The girl's lips parted. Her eyes softened as she finally understood. She covered her mouth with her hand, her own eyes filling with tears. For years, she had been treated as invisible. As a deaf girl, many people ignored her, judged her, or pitied her. But never had someone looked at her the way this man was looking now, with respect, with gratitude, with awe. The billionaire turned his gaze to the boy again. His small body looked so fragile, yet his eyes carried hope. The billionaire squeezed the boy's hand gently, whispering, "You are lucky to have her." His voice broke on the last word. He thought of all the people in his life who had abandoned him for money, all the so-called friends who only stayed close for his wealth. None of them had shown him this kind of pure, selfless love. Suddenly, the billionaire felt overwhelmed. He leaned back, covering his face with both hands. His shoulders shook as he cried harder. His whole body trembled as years of buried emotions poured out. The girl watched him silently, her heart aching for this man who seemed so strong yet so broken inside. She reached out carefully and placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple touch, but it carried comfort. The billionaire lowered his hands and looked at her. His face wet, his eyes raw with emotion, he whispered, "You changed me. You showed me more humanity in one day than I've seen in my entire life." He pointed at her again, his finger trembling. "You made me cry. No one has done that for years." The girl tilted her head. Trying to catch his meaning, she did not understand every word, but she understood enough. She saw the truth in his tears. She saw the change in his eyes. She gave him a small, gentle smile, one that spoke louder than words. The room was silent except for the billionaire's heavy breathing, but it felt alive with emotions. The girl's brother reached for the drawing she had made earlier and held it up toward the billionaire. It was a small sketch of a smiling family. The billionaire looked at it and his lips trembled. He realized the boy wanted to include him in their small circle. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere, not because of his money, but because of love. His tears flowed again, but this time they were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of healing, of rediscovery. He had built walls around himself for so long, walls made of wealth and power, but this deaf girl and her sick brother had broken them with nothing more than kindness and innocence. The billionaire whispered one final truth, more to himself than to them. "I thought I was rich, but tonight I learned what true wealth is." His voice shook, his heart heavy yet light at the same time. And as he looked at the girl and her brother, his tears fell freely, not from weakness but from a newfound strength. The night felt different inside that tiny room. The billionaire sat quietly, his heart still heavy from tears. The girl watched him, her face full of questions. She did not know what would happen next, but something in his eyes told her that he was no longer the same man who had handed her the black card in the cafe. He had changed. The little boy had fallen asleep, his weak body wrapped warmly in the sweater. His breathing was soft and steady. The billionaire looked at him for a long time. His chest ached as he thought about how unfair life was. One child was born into endless wealth like him, and another was born into poverty. Struggling to survive, he whispered to himself, "This is not right." He turned his gaze back to the girl. She sat quietly on the floor, her hands resting on her knees. She was tired, but her eyes shone with strength. She had done everything for her brother, sacrificing her own needs. The billionaire took a deep breath and spoke softly, "From now on, you don't have to suffer alone." She could not hear the words clearly, but she saw his lips move. She tried to read them, and though she only understood part, the kindness in his tone told her everything. He pointed to her brother, then to her, and finally to himself, pressing his hand firmly against his chest. His eyes were steady now, no longer hiding behind pride. He wanted her to know that he was not leaving. He wanted to help. The girl blinked, shocked. She shook her head quickly, raising her hands as if to say no. She did not want charity, she did not want pity. She only wanted to stand on her own. But the billionaire leaned forward, his eyes soft yet firm. He pulled out the black card again and placed it on the small wooden table. Then he added his wallet beside it. He pointed to them and then to her. His lips trembled as he said, "This is not pity. This is family." She could not hear the words, but she understood from the way he pressed his hand against his heart. His meaning was clear, her eyes filled with tears. She signed quickly, her hands trembling, telling him she did not deserve it, telling him she was only an ordinary girl, but he shook his head strongly, standing up. He walked across the room and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was steady, reassuring. He bent slightly so she could see his lips clearly and whispered, "You deserve everything." The girl covered her face with her hands, sobbing silently. She had been strong for so long, carrying all the weight of the world for her brother, and now someone was finally carrying her. Her tears fell freely. Her body shook with emotion. The billionaire knelt beside her and let her cry. His own eyes grew wet again, but this time his tears felt lighter. They were tears of healing. The next morning, the world outside was still the same. Cars honked, people rushed, life went on. But inside that small apartment, everything had changed. The billionaire returned with doctors, nurses, and supplies. The boy was checked carefully, medicine was given, and hope began to bloom in the small room. The girl watched with wide eyes as professionals cared for her brother. It felt like a dream. She looked at the billionaire, her lips forming a soft thank you. He only smiled and nodded. Days turned into weeks. The boy's health began to improve. His pale cheeks gained color, his laughter returned, and his eyes sparkled with energy again. The girl could finally breathe for the first time in years. She slept without the fear of losing him in the night. The billionaire visited often, sometimes with food, sometimes with gifts, but most importantly with his presence. He no longer came as a test, he came as a friend, as family. He learned to watch her hands, slowly picking up small signs to understand her better. He tried awkwardly at first, making mistakes, but she laughed softly and corrected him. Their bond grew simple and pure. The city began to whisper about him. People noticed the change. The cold, distant man who once lived only for money was no longer the same. He gave more to charity. He listened more, he smiled more. His heart had been touched by a deaf girl and her sick brother. And the whole world could see it one evening. As the sun set and painted the sky orange, the billionaire sat with the girl and her brother on the steps of their building. The boy leaned happily against him, holding a small toy the billionaire had bought. The girl sat on the other side, her hands folded on her lap. The billionaire looked at them and whispered softly, This is wealth." He didn't mean the money in his bank or the buildings he owned. He meant this moment, this family, this love. The girl turned her head toward him. She didn't hear the words, but she saw the truth in his eyes. She smiled gently, a smile that carried all the gratitude in the world. From that day on, their lives were never the same. The billionaire made sure they had a safe home, proper food, and education. But more than that, he gave them something they had never had before: security, comfort, and someone who cared. And in return, they gave him something he had never had despite all his riches: love. The billionaire had set out to test a girl, to prove to himself that people were selfish. Instead, she had tested him, and he had discovered the greatest truth. Wealth was not counted in gold or money. Wealth was counted in hearts, in love, in sacrifice. And so, the story of a deaf girl, her little brother, and a billionaire who cried became a story of family, a story of kindness, and a reminder that even in the coldest hearts, love can still bloom.